and welcome to the second day of coverage of the SAPOA Annual Convention and Property Networking 2022 event taking place in the Northwest. I'm Moik Peterson, and this is focused on SAPOA. The purpose of the convention is to encourage engaging conversations and deliberation on issues of pertinence with the commercial property sector. My guests today are Futurist Daniel Silke, Director of Political Futures, and Itumeleng Mothibeli, Managing Director, Vukile Property Fund Limited, Southern Africa. Let's start with Daniel Silke, who delivered a talk on the topic South Africa and the world in 2023. Fasten your seatbelts. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
Daniel, let's get straight into it. What are your hopes for economic growth within South Africa?
Yeah, I think South Africa really is going to be buffeted by, of course, global issues. And I spoke this morning extensively about our major trading partners, the United States, the UK, the EU, and of course, China, all looking at substantially lower growth rates. So part of our GDP slump that we're experiencing now, and I would argue also that we will experience over at least the next year and possibly even 24 months, is going to be based upon a global slump, taking into account the global factors of high inflation, the effects of high interest rates, and of course, low growth rates as a result. The demand for South African products could also come under pressure as a result of shrinking disposable income in many of our core export markets. So I think that's sort of part A of the answer, but part B of the answer is the continued political risk uncertainty within South Africa. Clearly, the ANC elective conference at the end of the year adds additional concern, the lack of policy clarity coming from government, and of course, the broader energy crisis continues to play havoc with business planning and of course with the GDP output as well. And all those factors together, and there are many others as well, I might add, I could add in a dysfunctional local government, which really affects the property sector in particular, crime and violence as well, all effectively will keep our GDP rate at lackluster levels, to say at best, and in fact at very disappointing levels for the next 2 years.
Now, Daniel, what should government do to avoid a recession in the near future?
Well, I think, a recession, if there is to be a recession and, effectively, if we have a second quarter of negative growth, we will be in a technical recession. There's not much that government is going to be able to do over the next quarter in order to change that particular path. The extended blackouts that we are having now in South Africa is simply going to push us into a recession, whether we like it or not. And we know that there are no quick fix solutions. The president has said that, and I think those who analyze energy in South Africa will understand it doesn't matter how many new board members you have. You've got antiquated equipment, poor maintenance, graft and corruption. All of these issues require a medium and long-term strategy. So I think we are going to go into a recession before the end of the year. But of course, we will be alongside other economies as well in recession. It's just a pity, in a sense, that part of our recession really is as a result of an own goal, the energy crisis in South Africa. I mean, we are not like Europe, where we're reliant upon Russian gas. We are reliant upon what should be a reliable domestic supply of energy. And if we'd planned adequately for the last 15 years, we would have had a very good mix of potentially coal, yes, but renewables and even more nuclear into the equation. And we simply didn't have the foresight or the capacity or the managerial or the political will to enable us, to strengthen us, because of course the global environment goes through highs and lows, and we're currently going through a challenging and very, I think, disruptive period in the world from a global perspective.
Now, Daniel, thank you for touching on the blackouts. With the rolling blackouts more frequently occurring, is there still hope for prosperity for growth in the economy?
I've always believed that there's hope. Now, I mean, I can be very critical, and I have been critical certainly about government. Government has been far too reactive. It hasn't been proactive enough. That's probably its biggest problem, is that it's simply not a proactive government. But there is always hope. And I think the hope comes that, when the old saying goes, when push comes to shove, and frankly, when the lights go off, we really need to reevaluate how we do business from a government point of view. And I have to say, we have to reevaluate from a government or from an ANC point of view. the kind of ideology that we implement in economic policy in South Africa. We have to really think about embracing public-private partnerships. There is a role for the state, there's a role for the private sector. And there should be a social compact, which the president has spoken about. But is that social compact between the state and the private sector, can it really be genuine? Can there be a genuine embrace within the governing party at all its levels of the need to involve the private sector together with the state in providing critical services? And I think we have to make that leap. It mustn't be forced upon the ANC. It's got to come from the ANC itself, because the private sector absolutely want to cooperate. It's in their interests. It's in their interests for the bottom line. So I do think that there remains hope on that particular side. Where there is state failure, and the developmental state in South Africa, if it's an experiment, it hasn't been a very successful experiment, it'll now rely upon the private sector to help pick up the pieces. And if that can be established, then I think the skill set in the private sector and their willingness to cooperate, and their willingness also to accept the social imperative and the need to provide a better life for South Africans, all of those factors I think can propel us forward. So I'm not negative in that sense. I just think there has to be a lot of ideological movement within the broader ANC to bring us to a better stage in our planning for the future.
Now, in the upcoming year, will South Africa be able to maintain a positive growth outlook? Which industries are contributing the most to the economy's growth, and how can they improve growth within the sector?
Well, again, I think that I would love to talk about the potential of mining and manufacturing in particular, two industries that have really borne the brunt of load shedding. And you've seen the value added from those two sectors drop given the last GDP figures. Now, those are two sectors, particularly in manufacturing, that I think can contribute to GDP, and it can certainly be an employment generator. And we know that a relatively low-end manufacturing is probably one of the, I would say, medium-term options for South Africa to try and encourage. But if the lights don't remain on, you're not going to be able to do that. So certainly the energy position has to be clarified. And I also think that the labor relations framework that allows for a relatively low entrant into a low-end manufacturing job, the wage labor rates, the conditions of employment also have to be conducive to stimulate that particular demand and for the private sector to come in and invest. So there are some political conundrums that really are bottlenecks before we can really talk about growing growth in South Africa. And I do think that these are political issues, the ideological issues for the ANC to grapple with. But there are good sectors in South Africa. Agriculture's been good. It's off the boil now, certainly in the last quarter and possibly in the next quarter. But I think that the services industry has been strong. Tourism in particular has bounced back very nicely in South Africa. The financial services sector is relatively healthy within the country. And I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit in South Africa that also really needs to be encouraged and can filter in to the broader macro environment. So, I mean, I don't think one should really sort of argue this is the end of days and that there's no hope. There's always sectors and always innovation in all of these sectors that can spur on our economy, but that enabling environment, it's not just what I call the hard product, which is the energy issue. It's the soft product, the policy environment, and the relationship between the private sector and the state that really need to be enhanced in order to take us out of a recession and put us at least on a path to limited growth with a view to moving towards a 3 or 4% threshold that we really should have as a minimum in order to absorb all of those job seekers coming onto the market.
Very interesting outlook, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel Silke, Director of Political Future, for your insights. Let's hear now from Itumeleng Mothibeli, Managing Director, Vukile Property Fund Limited, Southern Africa. Itumeleng, welcome, and let's jump right into it, sir.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Now, Itumeleng, how has South Africa's weakened economic state affected the real estate sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has impacted the real estate sector. The challenged inflation is impacting on interest rates as we try and manage our monetary policy. And I think what's that done is it's decreased the discretionary spend and disposable income of what our consumers and our shoppers have ultimately. So it has had some challenges, but I think from a Vukile perspective, our portfolio generally is in township, rural, and what we call commuter modes. And in that context, we have significant value and significant catchment areas, and we found limited impacts of the economy because of the volumes that we see through our malls. And we've been quite encouraged with the operating metrics of our portfolio over this period. It's definitely something that we think about, we're concerned about, but I think, looking at Vukile and our defensive portfolio, we've been encouraged by the outcomes that we've generated over the past 6 months.
Now, with these challenges, which property type in this sector, has seen the worst effects of this economic uncertainty? And furthermore, which one has still seen growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think, because absorption of space in the office sector is directly correlated to GDP growth, the office sector has perhaps seen, the most noticeable challenge in terms of just absorption of space, and especially if one considers the development of office nodes in and around South Africa. So I'd definitely say that the office sector has perhaps been the most challenged. There's a lot happening in that sector in terms of repurposing space, changing usage, and I think that's quite creative, and they could find that that repurposing of space can add value and improve that segment of the market. We've seen, however, that the retail side has been extremely resilient. It's performed well. Our trading stats are now back to, when we compare to pre-COVID levels. So we're seeing shoppers coming into the mall in terms of our footfall. That also compares very well to pre-COVID. So our spend in our malls, footfall that's coming through our malls, tenant demand, we're seeing great demand across a whole spectrum of tenants, from listed retailers to unlisted retailers. So we're seeing strong demand for space, we're seeing strong support from shoppers. And I would say, the retail segment, particularly retail in township, rural, commuter nodes, and also I think coming out of potential change in shopper behavior, our value shopping centers are also showing some significant positive performance.
Itumeleng, let's just touch on your spend. Vukile Property Fund has completed, the 90 million upgrade of its Davidton Mall in Ekurhuleni, Gauteng. This shows a positive outlook for real estate development. Can this expansion and development continue during these challenging economic times?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question because, building costs have been challenged because of the increased inflation. So we're finding that, new shopping centers coming on stream will most definitely decrease because, getting them viable when you're looking at the building costs has become a challenge. We've also found that, retailers in general would rather support a mall where they currently reside in, and they're happy to expand within that context. They're not too excited to support a new development, a new scheme that hasn't been proven in terms of performance. So I think in this current context of higher inflation, you're definitely going to see a slowdown in developments. Where perhaps you've got a mall that's already performing that is strong, such as Davidton Mall, and you've got bulk to expand it and strengthen it and make sure that it's stronger in its context and in the node. I think those types of brownfields developments will continue. And those are the ones that will make sure that, those particular assets are relevant. And we always say, when we're looking at expansions such as the one that we've done at Davidton Mall, our primary source of what placement of tenants that we'll introduce will be driven by a customer-centric approach. So we will go out, collect data, understand what the consumer wants on the ground, and we will then introduce those tenants in that redevelopment.
With the rising concern of climate change, how has the South African real estate sector adapted to this trend, and has there been a rise in eco-living real estate?
I mean, I think the South African property sector has invested a lot in making sure that the way that we manage our properties and our portfolios are environmentally friendly. From a Vukile perspective, 9% of all of our energy usage within the portfolio across all 46 shopping centers. So you look at the broader portfolio, 9% of all of our energy usage comes from renewables. We think that is something that we definitely need to intensify on, because ultimately, addressing issues of the environment builds onto, sustainable business that will be geared for the future and ultimately will benefit shareholders. So I think in the sector, there's a lot of thinking around making sure that buildings are green rated, developments get a green star rating, and it's something that a lot of developers and definitely us at Vukile are prioritizing in terms of how we manage our portfolio.
Thank you, Itumeleng Mothibeli, Managing Director, Vukile Property Fund Limited, Southern Africa. And that brings us to the end of our coverage of the SAPOA Annual Convention. And thank you for watching. From me, Moig Peterson, and the team, it's goodbye for now.